34 days after the Battle of the Trade Route Earth Orbit, the SOL shipyards had become a city. Construction drones filled the space between orbital docks. New destroyers slowly rotated inside fabrication frames. Frigates stretched for hundreds of meters beneath massive construction cranes. The unfinished skeleton of humanity's second battleship dominated one section of the yards. Farther away, the enormous Leviathan-class dreadnought continued taking shape. No one stopped to admire them anymore. They had become part of the skyline, docked beside Orbital Diplomatic Station 1. Humanity's newest science ship gleamed beneath the station lights. Unlike the Unity, she carried no heavy railguns, no missile launchers, no marine barracks. Instead, large panoramic observation decks stretched along her hull. Entire sections were dedicated to laboratories, botanical habitats, medical facilities, particle physics, astronomical observatories. Her hull bore a single inscription, TSV Endeavour. Inside the Unity, scientists hurried through spotless, newly converted corridors carrying unopened equipment cases. Human technicians calibrated hundreds of new consoles. Medical staff unpacked laboratories unlike anything Earth had ever possessed. Chief Brooks wandered through main engineering holding a mug of coffee. He looked around. This place is... He searched for the word. Clean. A young engineer laughed. It hasn't had Marines aboard yet. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. Elsewhere. Captain Reyes walked beside Ambassador Evelyn Winters. I still can't believe they gave us the Endeavour. Winters smiled. They didn't. Reyes looked confused. They entrusted it to us. A pause. There's a difference. Reyes slowly nodded. I suppose there is. A soft chime echoed throughout the ship. The bridge officer looked up. Captain, the Assembly Science Delegation has arrived. The massive observation windows overlooked Docking Bay 4. Several shuttles approached together, one Avari, one Sylvan. 3 from civilizations humanity had never met. The first shuttle settled gracefully onto the deck, its hatch lowered. A tall Avari stepped out carrying an absurd amount of equipment. Chief Brooks smiled. They're bringing tools! The second shuttle opened. 3 Sylvan researchers emerged, elegant, calm, confident. Several young Terran technicians quietly stopped working for just a moment before remembering themselves. One of the Sylvan noticed. She smiled politely. Some things apparently never changed. Then, the third shuttle landed. The hatch slowly lowered. Silence settled across the docking bay. Nothing happened. A moment passed, then another. Finally, a tiny face cautiously peeked around the edge of the hatch. Large amber eyes, triangular ears, soft rust-colored fur framed by white markings. A tail nearly as long as her body swayed nervously behind her. She looked left, then right, then stepped onto Terran soil for the first time. She stood 4 feet and a few inches tall, wearing a neatly tailored white scientific coat over a practical field uniform. Several data pads were balanced expertly in one arm. She froze. Her ears slowly rotated toward the enormous viewport overlooking Earth. It's... She whispered so quietly that only those nearest could hear. Beautiful. No one moved. One dockworker quietly muttered, Holy. Another whispered, She's adorable. The little scientist turned toward them. Her ears perked forward. Thank you. She said it with complete sincerity, as though she'd simply been complimented on her research. The silence finally broke. Chief Brooks blinked. Is she... He looked toward the assembly liaison. Supposed to be that small? The liaison smiled. She's slightly above average height. Brooks looked back. Huh. The Carenthi scientist walked only a few steps before stopping beside a decorative planter filled with Terran flowers. She knelt beside it, gently touched one of the leaves. Her ears perked with excitement. Oh, she smiled. I've only seen Terran roses in photographs. She immediately opened a datapad and began making notes. The humans simply watched. Chief Brooks leaned toward Reyes. She got distracted. Reyes nodded. By a flower. I like her already. Another Carenthi stepped from the shuttle, then another, 8 in total, different fur colors, golden, silver, black, cream. One carried what appeared to be 6 datapads, stacked almost to her chin. Another stopped to admire Earth's moon through the observation window. One quietly waved at a passing maintenance drone. The drone pilot actually waved back. The docking bay felt lighter. No speeches, no political tension, just quiet curiosity. Ambassador Winters stepped forward. Welcome to Earth. The eldest Carenthi approached. She bowed politely. I am Dr. Nira, Chief Xenobiologist. She looked around the docking bay, then toward the humans surrounding her. Her ears slowly lifted. She smiled. It feels... She paused, searching for the proper translation. Comfortable. The assembly liaison beside her quietly smiled. They're already saying it. Winters looked over. Saying what? The liaison watched the Carenthi scientists excitedly examining everything around them. The first word every Carenthi thinks when they meet humanity. Winters raised an eyebrow. And what's that? The liaison answered with one simple word. Safe. No one noticed, but every Carenthi present, without discussing it, had unconsciously drifted closer to the Terrans than to anyone else in the docking bay. Not because they were afraid, not because they needed protection, but because every instinct they possessed told them they had just found something precious, home away from home. From an observation balcony high above the docking bay, Marshal Mercer watched the scene unfold. Sergeant Harris stepped beside him. So, he looked down at the tiny, fluffy scientists, excitedly photographing flowers and staring at Earth. Are those really some of the smartest people in the galaxy? Mercer watched one of them become completely fascinated by a butterfly that had wandered into the docking bay greenhouse. He smiled. I have absolutely no doubt. Harris folded his arms. They're going to completely take over this ship. Mercer chuckled. I think they already have. As if on cue, one of the Carenthi looked up. She spotted Mercer watching from the balcony. She smiled brightly, then waved enthusiastically with both hands. Mercer blinked, then slowly waved back. Beside him, Harris sighed. We're doomed, Mercer smiled. Yeah, probably. Morning aboard the Unity began much the same as it always had. The distant thump of construction echoed through the hull. Welders sparked beyond the armored bulkheads. Repair drones drifted past the viewports outside. The old battleship still rested inside Dry Dock 1, scarred, half disassembled, surrounded by thousands of workers, yet somehow she felt more alive than ever. The multinational crew had already settled into a routine. Human engineers argued with Avari shipwrights over structural supports. Sylvan tactical specialists quietly rewrote Terran fleet doctrines, one simulation at a time. And somewhere, without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, the Carenthi had begun quietly taking over the ship. Not through authority, not through politics, simply by existing. Chief Brooks stepped into Medical Laboratory 2 carrying a steaming mug of coffee. He stopped. Every available tabletop had disappeared beneath research equipment. Plants, microscopes, biological samples, stacks of datapads. 3 Carenthi sat together around one workstation, discussing cellular regeneration with astonishing speed. Another had somehow climbed onto the highest storage cabinet in the laboratory. She wasn't working. She was simply watching Earth through the viewport. Her enormous tail slowly swayed behind her. Brooks looked up. Comfortable? Without taking her eyes off Earth, she answered, very. Best view on the ship. Brooks nodded. Fair enough. He continued walking. Nobody questioned it anymore. Dr. Carter entered moments later. One Carenthi researcher was carefully unpacking nutrient packs. Dr. Carter frowned. Is all of that breakfast? The little scientist looked up. No, she pointed. That was breakfast. She pointed at another stack. This is second breakfast. Another. 11's. Another. Lunch. Dr. Carter blinked. How many meals do you eat? The scientist counted on her fingers. Usually 7. Dr. Carter quietly opened her datapad. Fleet supply request. Increase food allocation for Carenthi personnel immediately, elsewhere aboard the Unity. Marshal Mercer walked through one of the main corridors. Construction crews stepped around open maintenance panels. Sylvan Marines trained beside Terran Marines in temporary exercise areas. The old battleship had become wonderfully chaotic. As Mercer rounded a corner, he nearly walked into Dr. Nera. She was kneeling beside one of the decorative plants recently installed by the botanical department. Good morning, she smiled brightly. Marshal? He looked toward the plant. Research? She shook her head. I simply think it's beautiful. Mercer looked at the flower, then back at Nera. I've walked past that thing 20 times. I never really looked at it. She smiled warmly. You should. He stood there another few seconds. Yeah, I probably should. By lunchtime, word had spread across the ship. The Carenthi weren't just intelligent, they were adorable. Nobody had intended for that description to become official, yet somehow it had. One young engineer whispered to another, I would literally fight someone for these little fluff balls. An Avari engineer looked over. I believe that is already becoming standard Terran behavior. The elderly engineer wasn't joking. Without realizing it, humans had already begun changing. Whenever a Carenthi carried heavy equipment, someone immediately offered to help. When crowded corridors filled with workers, Terran crew instinctively made space. When one struggled to reach an overhead storage compartment, 3 Marines appeared before she'd even found a ladder. Nobody ordered it, nobody discussed it. It simply felt right. Late that afternoon, General Hale met with the Assembly liaison. I've been reviewing personnel reports. He looked confused. Apparently, every Carenthi requested permanent assignment aboard Terran vessels. The liaison smiled knowingly. They did. Why? She folded her hands. The answer is wonderfully simple. She looked toward the viewport where several Carenthi laughed together with Terran engineers. They've decided they're home. General Hale blinked. Already? They knew within minutes. That evening, construction outside the hull finally slowed. The Unity grew quieter. Movie night had once again claimed the Marine recreation room. The lights dimmed. An old Terran comedy played across the main screen. Chief Brooks was losing another chess match to an Avari engineer. Several Sylvan tactical specialists watched the movie with intense concentration, trying to understand why humans laughed at someone repeatedly walking into the same door. Marshal Mercer slipped quietly into the room carrying a mug of coffee. He found the last empty chair. Finally, peace. He opened an operations report. 10 seconds later, soft footsteps approached. Dr. Nera stood beside him. She looked around the room. Every couch was full, every chair occupied. Her ears tilted slightly. Marshal, may I ask something? Mercer lowered his report. Of course. She hesitated. It was the first time anyone had seen the brilliant scientist appear uncertain. May I join your nest? The room became completely silent. Mercer blinked. My nest! Across the room, the assembly liaison quietly stood. I believe this is my fault. Everyone looked toward her. We neglected one rather important cultural briefing. She smiled toward Nira. In Carenti culture, your nest is wherever your trusted family is. She looked back toward the humans. When a Carenti asks to join your nest, they are offering you their complete trust. Silence filled the room. Nira's ears slowly lowered. If the answer is no. I understand. Mercer immediately shook his head. No. He smiled warmly. There's always room. Nira's entire posture relaxed. She smiled. A smile so genuine that half the room smiled with her. She climbed carefully onto the couch beside him, curled into a fluffy little ball against his side, wrapped her enormous tail around herself, opened her datapad, and immediately resumed reading a paper on xenobiological immune systems. Nothing else happened. Mercer turned another page in his report. Across the room, Sergeant Harris finally whispered, "That's it?" The liaison nodded. "That's it. I thought there'd be some sort of ceremony." There was. She smiled. You just watched it. Over the next hour, the room slowly transformed. Another Carenti entered. She noticed Dr. Carter reading alone. She quietly walked over. "May I join your nest?" Dr. Carter smiled immediately. "I'd like that." The little scientist happily settled beside her, leaning gently against her shoulder while continuing to review medical research. Chief Brooks looked up from his chess game. A young Carenti stood beside him. Every seat nearby was taken. She looked at the floor beside his chair, then at him. "May I?" Brooks grinned. "Go right ahead." She happily sat beside him, tail wrapped loosely around the chair leg as she quietly read through engineering schematics. Brooks continued losing at chess. Neither thought anything unusual had happened. Captain Reyes paused quietly in the doorway. She watched the room. Humans, Avari, Sylvan, Carenti. No speeches, no politics, just people, living together. One young Terran private looked around the room and quietly smiled. "This ship feels different." An older Marine nodded. "Yeah, it feels like home." Dr. Nira suddenly looked up from her datapad. A soft, gentle, rhythmic rumble filled the room. Several humans looked around. "What's that sound?" Dr. Carter smiled. "I think she's purring." Nira looked embarrassed. "Oh dear, I apologize." Mercer looked over. "For what?" "When I become especially comfortable, I cannot stop." Mercer smiled. "Don't." He looked around the lounge. The room somehow felt calmer, quieter, warmer. "I think we like it." Several other Carenti had begun softly purring as they read, played games, or simply rested beside their new Terran friends. The sound blended into the background like a quiet fireplace. No one wanted to interrupt it. Outside the viewport, Earth slowly turned beneath the stars. Construction lights reflected across the battered hull of the Unity. She was still under repair, still surrounded by cranes, still bearing the scars of humanity's first battle. But inside, she had become something far greater than a warship. She had become a home, not just for Terrans, not just for Avari, not just for the Sylvan, but now for the tiny Carenti as well. And without anyone saying it aloud, every human aboard had already reached the same conclusion. If anything ever threatened these little scientists, it would have to get through the United Terran Collective first. 3 days later, the Unity was no longer quiet. She was alive, not because the repairs were nearing completion, not because new systems had come online, but because the crew had settled into a rhythm. The Carenti had become a permanent part of shipboard life, No one remembered exactly when it happened, only that. One day, it simply felt normal. Morning aboard the Unity. Marshal Mercer stepped onto the bridge carrying a cup of coffee. Lieutenant Evans looked up from tactical. "Morning, sir." "Morning." Mercer stopped. There, sitting comfortably in Captain Reyes' chair, was a tiny Carenthi. She wasn't touching any controls. She wasn't pretending to command the ship. She was simply watching stars drift past the forward viewport while eating something out of a small bowl. She looked over. "Oh!" She smiled brightly. "Good morning, Marshal." Mercer smiled. "Morning." She immediately stood. "I apologize. I was only borrowing the view." "It's the nicest one on the ship." Mercer chuckled. "I don't think the captain will mind." She didn't. When Captain Reyes arrived minutes later, she simply smiled. "I take it you enjoyed yourself?" The little scientist nodded enthusiastically. "The stars are beautiful from here." Reyes looked out the viewport. "They are." She looked back. "Come by whenever you'd like." The Carenthi's ears perked. "Really?" "Of course." Engineering. Chief Brooks was elbow-deep inside a shield emitter. An Avari engineer handed him another diagnostic scanner. Without looking, Brooks held out his hand. Instead, something tiny gently placed the tool into it. "Thank you." "No problem." Brooks finally looked up. Dr. Neera. She had somehow appeared without making a sound. She smiled. "I noticed you were missing it." Brooks laughed. "You've been hanging around engineers too much." "I enjoy engineers. They build impossible things." The Avari beside them nodded. "They also occasionally fix them." Later that afternoon, a fire suppression drill echoed through the ship. Klaxons sounded, emergency lights flashed, crew members moved quickly to their assigned stations. The Carenthi reacted differently than anyone expected. Without discussion, every single one instinctively moved toward the nearest human, not in panic, not in fear, simply instinct. By the time the drill ended, General Hale had noticed. "So?" he asked the assembly liaison. "They always do that," she nodded. "They don't even realize they're doing it. They simply gather around the people they trust most." Hale watched one Carenthi happily chatting with a Marine while waiting for the all-clear. "They've chosen us." "Yes." "They have." That evening, movie night had expanded. The lounge was packed. Humans, Sylvan, Avari, Carenthi. The old Terran comedy played across the screen. The laughter came at different times depending on the species. The Sylvan appreciated clever dialogue. The Avari laughed at engineering mistakes. The Carenthi laughed because everyone else was laughing. Their joy was contagious. Halfway through the film, the power flickered, only for a second. Brooks groaned. "I swear!" "If that's another relay." He stood. Before he reached the door, 3 Carenthi were already following him. "We can help. We brought scanners. And snacks." Brooks blinked. "Why snacks?" One smiled proudly. "And problems are easier after snacks." Brooks looked at the Avari engineer. The Avari shrugged. "I cannot argue with that logic." An hour later, the relay had been repaired. Brooks wiped grease from his hands. The Carenthi looked at the repaired console. "It works." "It does." They all smiled. One quietly reached into a small bag. She handed Brooks a wrapped pastry. "For good work." Brooks stared at it. "You reward engineers with food?" She tilted her head. "Should we not?" He laughed. "No, you absolutely should." As the days passed, the crew began noticing something. The Carenthi never forgot birthdays, never forgot favorite foods, never forgot when someone seemed tired. If a Marine skipped breakfast, someone quietly appeared with toast. If an engineer worked through lunch, a tiny scientist would eventually arrive carrying a tray. "You forgot again." "I know. Please eat." "Yes, Mom." Dr. Carter reviewed the latest psychological evaluations. She frowned, then read them again. Stress-related incidents, down. Arguments, down. Sleep quality, improved. Morale, the highest since the Unity had launched. She looked toward the observation lounge. Through the glass, she watched a dozen crew members playing cards. 3 Carenthi sat among them. One was asleep. Another was enthusiastically losing at poker because she smiled every time she had good cards. Dr. Carter quietly smiled. Well, I suppose the data speaks for itself. Near midnight, Mercer walked the silent corridors. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. As he passed the science section, he found Dr. Nera sitting alone beneath the observation dome. Earth filled the stars beyond. She looked peaceful. You couldn't sleep. She shook her head. I was thinking. About what? She watched Earth for another moment. When we first arrived, I expected to teach humanity. She smiled softly. I did not expect humanity to teach us. Mercer leaned against the window. What have we taught you? She looked at him. That strength can be gentle. She glanced toward the sleeping ship. You protect us. Not because we're weak, but because you want us to feel safe. A quiet purr escaped her. We've never known that. Mercer was silent for a long moment. Finally, he smiled. Get used to it. Nera's ears perked. I believe. We already are. Outside, the battered hull of the Unity reflected Earth's blue light. She was still under repair, still scarred, still a warship, but inside those steel walls, something extraordinary had taken root. Not an alliance, not yet. Something stronger. A family. 2 weeks later, Earth orbit, for the first time in human history. The orbital shipyards fell silent. Construction drones powered down. Welding torches dimmed. Thousands of workers gathered along observation platforms overlooking Dockyard 1. Every viewport, every station, every ship watched. 5 enormous hulls rested side by side, freshly painted, their armor still gleaming beneath Earth's sunlight. The first true battle line of the United Terran Collective. In the center, the battle-scarred veteran, Unity, scars still visible beneath new armor, battle honors already etched into her hull. She had earned the right to keep them. No one wanted them polished away. To her port, a brand new battleship. The letters slowly illuminated. Forest. Beside her, Sparrow. Next, Frederick. Finally, Colton. 5 battleships, standing together for the first time. A hush fell across the shipyard. General Hale stepped onto the ceremony platform. Behind him stood representatives from nearly every assembly civilization, the Avari, the Sylvan, the Carenthi. Even species humanity had only recently met. None wanted to miss this moment. General Hale looked out over the assembled crowd. When humanity first reached the stars, we had 1 warship. He looked toward the Unity. 1. He smiled. Today, we become a fleet. Applause echoed throughout the station. He continued. These 4 new battleships are not named after admirals. They are not named after presidents. They are not named after famous explorers. A long pause. They are named after 4 ordinary people who chose to answer a distress call. Silence. Every person in attendance knew their names. Forrest, Sparrow, Frederick, Colton. They gave everything so others could live. He turned toward the 4 ships. So long as these vessels sail among the stars, they will answer that call again. One by one. The new crews stepped forward. Each captain saluted the memorial wall, bearing the names of those 4 fallen crew members before boarding their ships. It wasn't regulation. No one had ordered it. Every captain chose to do it. Captain Reyes watched quietly from the Unity's observation deck. Mercer stepped beside her. "They're beautiful," she nodded. "They're ours." A nearby Sylvan officer studied the 5 Terran battleships. "When we first met humanity," she smiled, "you possessed one ship." She looked back toward the growing fleet. "You've been busy," Chief Brooks laughed. "You have absolutely no idea." The ceremony continued. Next came the carriers. 5 massive fleet carriers drifted slowly into formation behind the battleships. Not built for direct combat, built to project humanity's reach. Rows upon rows of strike craft lined their cavernous hangars. Their names reflected humanity's ideals: Guardian, Sentinel, Bastion, Resolve, Vanguard. Then 20 destroyers emerged from surrounding docks. Formation lights ignited simultaneously. Behind them, 25 frigates, then 50 corvettes. The fleet continued growing before everyone's eyes. An Avari engineer quietly whistled. "I underestimated humans." A Sylvan commander nodded, as did we all. High above the ceremony, construction lights illuminated something far larger, something unfinished, something impossible to ignore. Every eye slowly turned upward. The skeletal frame stretched nearly 2 kilometers. Dockyard 4 had been built around it, not the other way around. Even unfinished, it dwarfed every other vessel present. General Hale looked toward it. "Our work is far from finished." The massive framework slowly rotated. Workers crawled across its surface like ants. Huge sections remained open to space, yet the outline was unmistakable. The first Terran dreadnought, future flagship, the Enterprise. No speeches were needed. Its size spoke for itself. Captain Reyes quietly watched the unfinished giant. Mercer joined her. "Think we'll ever serve aboard her?" Reyes smiled without taking her eyes off the dreadnought. "Maybe." Brooks walked up carrying a coffee. He stared at the enormous frame. "Engineering is going to hate me." Mercer laughed. "Why?" "They're eventually going to ask me to fix something on that." The 3 stood together in comfortable silence, watching workers continue assembling humanity's future. Below them, 5 battleships waited for orders. Above them, one legend was beginning to take shape. Earth was no longer building ships simply to defend itself. It was building a navy. And for the first time, the assembly realized exactly what humanity was becoming. Not conquerors, not expansionists, but protectors. A civilization that, when faced with the unknown, chose not to build a throne, but a fleet capable of answering anyone who called for help. 4 days later, the Unity had resumed something resembling normal operations. Repairs continued, training continued. The multinational crew had long since stopped referring to one another by species. Now, it was simply the crew. Deck 12, Marine Combat Training Facility. The large holographic arena shimmered to life. Urban terrain, collapsed buildings, smoke, limited visibility, perfect conditions for close-quarters combat. Marshal Mercer stood at the front of the room. Beside him, Colonel Lissara, the Sylvan Marine Commander, as always. She wore the standard Sylvan combat uniform, the same elegant deep blue fabric worn by every Sylvan aboard. Thin composite armor protected her chest, abdomen, shoulders, forearms and legs, light enough to preserve the speed her species was famous for, strong enough to stop shrapnel and glancing energy fire. Her long silver hair was tied neatly behind her, calm, composed, professional. She looked exactly like every Terran Marine secretly wished they could be. The younger Marines, unfortunately, were still human. Private Jenkins tried very hard to focus on the briefing. He failed. Corporal Diaz elbowed him. "Eyes up! They are! They are absolutely not!" Mercer didn't even turn around. Private. Jenkins immediately straightened. Sir, if Colonel Lissara notices you staring, I'm not saving you. Several Marines struggled not to laugh. Lissara glanced toward the Terrans. A faint smile crossed her face. She had heard every word. In Sylvan culture, attention wasn't considered disrespectful. Beauty was viewed as something to be appreciated. Embarrassing the observer, that was considered impolite, so she simply continued the briefing as if nothing had happened. The objective, she gestured toward the holographic city, is extraction. No unnecessary casualties. No unnecessary risks. Mercer nodded. Same objective from the Terran side. Everyone comes home. Lissara looked at him. A small pause. Then she smiled. An excellent doctrine. The exercise began. Human Marines advanced through the Western District. Sylvan Marines moved across rooftops with almost impossible grace. The differences between the two species became immediately obvious. Terrans relied on strength, formation, suppressive fire. The Sylvan relied on precision, timing, perfect positioning. Neither style was better. They simply complemented one another. Halfway through the exercise, one Terran squad found itself pinned down. Mercer assessed the situation. Before he could issue an order, Lissara had already reached the same conclusion. Their eyes met across the command platform. Neither spoke. Mercer pointed toward the eastern alley. She nodded once. Both issued different commands at exactly the same time. The maneuver worked perfectly. The trapped squad escaped. The opposing force was flanked. Exercise complete. Silence. Then the simulation shut down. Chief Instructor Wallace looked between them. Did you two plan that? Mercer shook his head. No. Lissara answered at the same time. We simply saw the same solution. Wallace blinked. Well, that's mildly terrifying. After the exercise, the Marines filtered out of the training hall. Lissara remained behind, reviewing performance data. Mercer walked over carrying 2 bottles of water. He offered one. For you. She accepted it with a slight bow of her head. My thanks. For a few moments, they simply studied the tactical recordings. Mercer broke the silence. Your people move like water. She looked at him. And yours stand like mountains. He smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. It was intended as one. Nearby. Sergeant Harris quietly leaned against the doorway. One of the Carenthi scientists sat on a nearby crate, happily eating dried fruit while watching the replay. She looked up at Harris. Are they friends? Harris smiled. Yeah, I think they are. The little Carenthi tilted her head. Good. She went back to her snack. Mercer closed the tactical display. Same time tomorrow? Lissara nodded. I would like that. Another brief silence. Comfortable, professional, built entirely on mutual respect. No one watching would have called it friendship. Not yet, but the foundation had quietly been laid. As Mercer left the training hall, Sergeant Harris fell into step beside him. Sir. What? You smiled. Mercer frowned. I smile. Not during tactical exercises. Mercer gave him a look. Careful, Sergeant. Harris grinned. Just making an observation. Mercer shook his head with a quiet chuckle. Get back to work. Yes, sir. Across the room, Lissara watched the 2 humans disappear into the corridor. One of her fellow Sylvan Marines approached. You work well together. Lissara looked back toward the closed door. Yes, we do. Nothing more was said. Nothing more needed to be. Some bonds weren't forged in dramatic moments. Sometimes they were built one training exercise at a time. 3 days later, The Unity remained secured inside Dry Dock 1. Her engines were still offline. New armor sections covered much of her hull. Repair crews continued working around the clock. For the first time since her commissioning, another battleship now stood ready to answer the call. Fleet Operations Center, Earth orbit. The operations floor was quiet. Sensor operators monitored trade lanes. Communications officers routed assembly traffic. Routine, calm. Then, a sharp tone echoed through the command center. Priority 1 distress signal. Every conversation stopped. An operator answered immediately. Source? Gamma 12 Trade Corridor. The transmission resolved. A frightened civilian voice filled the room. Mayday, this is civilian transport Golden Dawn. We are under attack. Static crackled. Then, please, someone answer. The signal disappeared. General Hale looked across the operations floor. Months ago, there had only been one choice: send the Unity today. He allowed himself the smallest smile. Dispatch Forest. Dockyard 3. The massive battleship waited with engines humming quietly. Her bridge crew stood at their stations, their first deployment, their first mission. Captain Elena Ward sat calmly in the command chair. A communications officer looked up. Orders from Fleet Command. Ward nodded. Go ahead. Proceed immediately to Gamma 12. Escort a civilian vessel under attack. A brief silence settled over the bridge. Then Ward smiled. Our first distress call. She stood. Helm. Take us out. Around her, the escort group came to life. 3 frigates moved from their berths. A destroyer slipped into formation. The ships assembled with practiced precision behind Forest. Aboard the Unity, movie night had just begun. Chief Brooks was once again arguing with an Avari engineer over the rules of chess. Mercer sat quietly reviewing tactical reports. Several Carenthi occupied an entire couch, somehow fitting 6 scientists into a space designed for 3 people. Then, the ship-wide announcement interrupted everything. Attention all personnel. Forest and her escort group are departing on an active rescue mission. Silence filled the lounge. Without a word, people began standing. The observation deck slowly filled. Humans, Sylvan, Avari, Carenthi. Everyone gathered at the massive windows overlooking the departure lanes. Outside, Forest eased away from the dock. 3 frigates fell into position. A destroyer completed the formation. No fanfare, no ceremony, just another mission. Exactly as it should be. Captain Reyes folded her arms. They look good, Mercer nodded. They've trained for this. Chief Brooks watched the formation disappear into the darkness. Feels strange. Reyes glanced toward him. What does? Watching someone else answer the call. She smiled quietly. Means we're finally becoming what we hoped. On Forest's bridge, Ward watched Earth slowly shrink behind them. Escort status. Formation complete. Navigation. Course locked. Tactical. No contacts. Ward rested both hands on the arms of her chair. Very well. She looked ahead. Let's go help someone. The 4 escorts tightened formation. Blue engine trails stretched across the darkness. Stars began to distort. Space folded. 5 Terran warships disappeared into FTL. Back aboard the Unity. The observation deck remained quiet. One of the Carenthi stood beside Mercer. They're doing what your crew did. Mercer never took his eyes off the empty stars. No. A small smile crossed his face. They're doing what Terrans do. Far beyond SOL, someone who had never heard of humanity, someone who believed no help was coming, was about to see 5 Terran warships emerge from faster-than-light travel. And for the first time, the burden of answering the galaxy no longer rested on one ship. It rested on a fleet. Nearly 6 hours later, The silence aboard the Unity ended. Fleet operations received a transmission. Priority Alpha. Origin. Forest. The bridge came alive. Captain Reyes, Mercer, Brooks, General Hale, and several assembly representatives gathered around the main tactical display. The transmission connected. Captain Elena Ward appeared on the screen. She looked tired. A scorch mark stretched across one side of the bridge behind her, but she was smiling. Captain Reyes. Reyes smiled back. Captain. Ward couldn't hide the grin any longer. We got there in time. The tactical display expanded. A civilian freighter drifted slowly across the screen. Its engines were crippled. Several compartments vented atmosphere. Nearby, 3 pirate vessels burned. Another was being tracked by the destroyer. The last had surrendered. Ward continued. The pirates fled as soon as they realized they were facing a Terran battleship. The ones that stayed, she shrugged, made poor life choices. A few quiet chuckles spread across the Unity's bridge. General Hale stepped forward. Casualties? Ward shook her head. None. Our escort group took only superficial damage. She paused. The civilian vessel lost 6 crew before we arrived. The bridge grew quiet. We weren't fast enough to save everyone. Reyes nodded solemnly. But you saved the rest. Yes, ma'am. We did. The captain of the freighter appeared on the secondary screen. An elderly alien with grey skin and tired eyes. He looked directly at the Terran officers. His voice trembled. I believed no one was coming. He looked toward Captain Ward. Then, they arrived. He smiled weakly. They never even asked who we were. They simply defended us. General Hale looked toward the assembly observers. None of them spoke. None needed to. They all remembered another distress call, another ship, another crew. The freighter captain continued. When the battle ended, I thanked Captain Ward. His eyes watered slightly. She told me, he smiled, you don't thank us for answering. That's what we're here for. Captain Ward looked slightly embarrassed. It seemed like the right thing to say. Chief Brooks leaned toward Mercer. I like her. Mercer smiled. I do too. The transmission ended. Silence remained on the bridge. Finally, one of the assembly delegates quietly spoke. They truly mean it. General Hale looked over. What? They answer. He looked around the bridge. No politics, no demands, no negotiations. They simply answer. Later that evening, news of Forrest's first mission spread through the assembly. Not because pirates had been defeated. Pirates were defeated every day. This was different. The story spread because of something the Terrans had done afterward. Forrest had remained on station for 12 hours, helping repair the freighter, sharing medical supplies, providing food, escorting the damaged ship safely to the nearest assembly station. Only then did she continue her patrol. Captain Reyes read the after-action report. She smiled. They've learned. Mercer looked up. From us. She shook her head. No. She closed the report. They've learned from humanity. Far from Earth. The surviving pirates drifted in escape pods. One looked back at the disappearing Terran ships. What kind of military wins the battle and spends half a day fixing the people they just rescued? No one answered. None of them understood it. Across assembly space, a new rumor quietly began spreading. Not about humanity's weapons, not about their battleships, not about the growing fleet around Earth. The rumor was much simpler. If a Terran ship answered your distress call, you were going home, back aboard the Unity. The Carenthi had gathered in the crew lounge for another movie night. One looked up from her data pad. She smiled. Forrest did well. Mercer nodded. She did. The little scientist tilted her head. You seem proud. He thought about it, then smiled. I am. Outside the viewport, Earth turned peacefully beneath the stars. Somewhere beyond that blue world, a brand new battleship was already writing her own history, not by destroying an enemy, but by saving strangers, exactly as the Unity had done before her. 1 year, 6 months later, the galaxy had changed, and so had humanity. What had once been a single battleship carrying the hopes of an entire civilization had become a navy. Trade routes that had once feared pirate attacks now welcomed Terran patrols. Distress calls were answered faster than ever. Assembly merchants had even coined a phrase, "If a Terran answers, you're already safe." The Unity had long since returned to service. Her battle scars remained. Captain Reyes had refused to polish them away. They remind us why we're here. No one argued. Now, she no longer sailed alone. Around her, her battle group maintained perfect formation. The carrier Guardian held the center of the rear formation. 4 destroyers maintained a defensive screen. 5 frigates watched the outer approaches. 10 corvettes ranged hundreds of thousands of kilometers ahead and behind the formation. The battle group moved as one. Months of training had made them nearly instinctive. The bridge felt comfortable. No longer the bridge of humanity's first battleship, now it was the bridge of the fleet's most experienced crew. Young officers transferred aboard hoping to learn. Veterans stayed because they couldn't imagine serving anywhere else. Long-range sensors clear. No distress calls. Commercial traffic operating normally. Captain Reyes smiled. I almost missed the excitement. Chief Brooks looked up from his engineering status display. No, you don't, she thought for a moment. No, I really don't. Laughter spread across the bridge. Far below, life aboard the Unity had found its rhythm. The Carenthi had become inseparable from the crew. Movie nights were standing tradition. Board games routinely lasted until 2 in the morning. Nobody questioned why a Carenthi psychologist might be asleep on a couch in the marine lounge after a long day. It was simply, home, Deck 9, Marine Officer Quarters. Marshal Mercer set 2 plates onto a small table. Nothing elaborate, just dinner. The door chimed. Come in. The hatch slid open. Colonel Lissara stepped inside, still graceful, still impeccably composed, still wearing the simple off-duty attire favored by the Sylvan aboard Terran ships. She carried a small container. I was told humans enjoy dessert after dinner. Mercer smiled. Depends who cooked. She raised an eyebrow. Should I be concerned? Probably. For just a fraction of a second, the corners of her mouth lifted. She placed the dessert on the table. Mercer served the meal. Neither stood on ceremony anymore. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty, just 2 officers sharing the end of another patrol. I've been practicing. Mercer looked up. Cooking? She nodded. Dr. Carter said humans bond over meals. Mercer chuckled. She's not wrong. I have made progress. You have. She tilted her head. You haven't tasted it yet. I have faith. Another small smile. That is either confidence or recklessness. Dinner passed quietly. Conversation drifted from training schedules to patrol reports to stories from Earth. Lissara listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, Mercer always listened. You miss your home? Mercer asked. She considered the question. Sometimes. She looked out the small viewport. The forests. The night air. The sound of the rivers. A brief pause. But she looked back toward him. I no longer feel far away. Mercer nodded slowly. I know that feeling. Silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. the kind that only existed between people who no longer felt the need to fill every moment with conversation. A soft chime interrupted them, the ship's evening announcement. "Movie night begins in 15 minutes. Lysara looked toward the door. "The Carenthi will be disappointed if we're late." Mercer laughed. "I think they've started keeping attendance." "I believe they have." As they stepped into the corridor, a tiny, rust-colored blur nearly collided with Mercer. Dr. Neera stopped abruptly. "Oh, I'm sorry." She looked between Mercer and Lysara. "Dinner?" Mercer nodded. "Yeah." Neera smiled. "I am pleased." Lysara looked mildly confused. "You are?" The little Carenthi nodded enthusiastically. "You both smile more than you used to." Mercer and Lysara exchanged a brief glance. Neither had realized it. Neera's ears perked happily. "I like when my friends are happy." Before either of them could answer, she wandered off down the corridor, humming softly to herself. Mercer watched her disappear. "They're observant." Lysara gave him a knowing look. "They're psychologists. I suppose hiding anything from them is impossible. I stopped trying months ago." For the first time, they both laughed together, not loudly, not dramatically, just naturally. They continued walking toward the crew lounge. Ahead, they could already hear laughter, the familiar rumble of content, Carenthi purring. Brooks arguing with an Avari over chess, someone insisting the popcorn belonged to everyone. The Unity was on patrol, ready for war if war came. But tonight, she carried something just as important, a crew that had become a family. And among them, 2 officers who, without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, had become one another's closest friend. 2 days later, the Unity battle group cruised silently along the edge of assembly space. To anyone watching, it looked uneventful. To Captain Reyes, uneventful was exactly how she liked it. The bridge was calm. Merchant traffic flowed normally. Civilian transports checked in as they passed through Terran patrol space. A freighter captain smiled as his ship crossed the formation. "Morning, Unity," Captain Reyes answered. "Morning, Silver Dawn. Everything quiet?" "So far." "Good. I'd like to keep it that way." The freighter captain laughed. "So would my insurance company." The bridge shared a quiet chuckle. It had become normal. Merchant captains recognized Terran warships. Some even greeted them by name. Below decks, life continued. The Carenthi medical staff had somehow convinced several Marines to participate in what they called a wellness study. Sergeant Harris frowned at the data pad in his hands. "This survey asks if I've been eating enough vegetables." Dr. Neera looked up. "Have you?" "No." She made a note. "I already knew that." Harris sighed. "Then why ask?" "Science. Engineering." Chief Brooks climbed out of an access tunnel covered in grease. An Avari engineer looked over. "You appear to have lost." Brooks looked down at himself. "Against what?" "The coolant system. It fought dirty." The Avari considered that. "Acceptable assessment." The 2 returned to work. Elsewhere, Colonel Lysara supervised another joint training session. Human Marines, Sylvan Marines, working as one unit. What had once required constant explanation now happened almost effortlessly. Hand signals were shared. Tactics blended naturally. The cultural differences remained. The friction had disappeared. Mercer watched from the command platform. A young lieutenant approached. "Sir, what is it?" "I've been reviewing combat footage from 18 months ago." Mercer nodded. "And?" The lieutenant smiled. "We've gotten a lot better." Mercer looked down at the Marines moving through the simulation. "No." He smiled faintly. "We've gotten better together." Later, the exercise ended. The Marines filtered toward the mess hall. Lysara fell into step beside Mercer. "I have a question." "Shoot." She frowned slightly. "Why do humans insist on calling every difficult training exercise a character-building experience?" Mercer laughed. "I honestly have no idea. I was hoping you knew. I'm afraid that's just us." She nodded thoughtfully. "I see. A beat. I still dislike character-building exercises. So do we." That evening, the crew lounge was unusually full. Not because of movie night, because Forrest had returned from patrol. Several officers from the younger battleship had transferred over for joint training and after-action reviews. One of Forrest's ensigns looked around the lounge. "I've heard stories." Chief Brooks glanced up. "About what?" "This place." He looked around. Humans laughing. An Avari teaching a Carenthi how to play chess. A Sylvan Marine quietly reading while two Carenthi leaned comfortably against the couch beside her. Someone had started making popcorn. It smelled terrible and wonderful. The ensign smiled. "I thought everyone was exaggerating." Brooks grinned. "Nope. This is pretty much every night." The ensign hesitated. "How did you build this?" Brooks looked around the room. He thought for a moment, then shrugged. "We didn't. It just happened." Across the room, one of the Carenthi looked up from her book. She quietly stood, walked over to the young ensign, and smiled. "Would you like to join our nest?" The ensign blinked. "I'd be honored." She took his hand and led him toward an empty spot on the couch. Within seconds, he was laughing with people he'd never met before. Captain Reyes stood quietly in the doorway, watching. General Hale had once asked her what made the Unity different from every other ship in the fleet. She finally knew the answer. It wasn't the weapons, it wasn't the officers, it wasn't even the victories. It was this. A place where humans, Avari, Sylvan, and Carenthi didn't simply serve together, they belonged together, outside. The battle group continued its steady patrol through the stars. Merchant vessels passed without fear. Pirates avoided Terran patrol sectors entirely. Distress calls had become rare, and that, Captain Reyes thought, was the greatest victory a warship could ever achieve.